The UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Andrew Doyle. I'm delighted to be joining you for yet another bank holiday evening. Coming up, should the isolation period be reduced to 5 days? That's what they've decided in the United States. We'll be speaking to Dr. David Strain shortly. And joining me to discuss this as well as some of the other of the day's top stories and tomorrow's front pages is my superstar panel. We have author and journalist Hilary Freeman, we have the editor at the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallace-Simons, and political consultant and playwright Emma Burnell. Also coming up, was this the year that Stonewall lost its halo? We're going to be speaking to Spiked journalist Joe Bartosh. GB News' very own Darren Grimes will be joining us just after 11 p.m. to talk energy. Who is to blame for the looming crisis and how damaging will it be to the economy? And of course, you can get in touch at any time. Just send us an email at gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can contact us on Twitter at gbnews. But first, here's the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Andrew, thank you. Good evening. This is your GB News. People should enjoy themselves at New Year, but exercise caution when celebrating. Those are the words of a senior government minister today. Gillian Keegan said people should go out and have fun to see in 2022, but take steps to limit their chances of catching the virus. New Year's Eve parties were given the green light in England yesterday after the government confirmed there'll be no new COVID restrictions before 2022. But a Labour MP has told GB News the picture is constantly changing because of new data.
Always looking to what will happen in the next week, the next 10 days, what will happen to admissions in hospital. Because, certainly in London, we are in a difficult place because 1 in 20 of us have got the virus, and that has a huge impact on the staff in our hospitals and our care sector. And also, I am sure that we all desperately want the schools to open next week. So it's really important that there's a plan to do that.
Meanwhile, in Scotland, the First Minister is warning COVID cases will continue to increase as the country experienced a record number of infections over the Christmas period. Nicola Sturgeon is urging people to get a booster jab if they haven't already and stick to social distancing measures. For the fourth consecutive day, over 8,000 positive cases were recorded in Scotland, with a peak of over 11,000 infections recorded on Boxing Day. Meanwhile, business leaders want more support for the hospitality sector after the Omicron variant led to a sharp decline in trade in the run-up to Christmas. British Chambers of Commerce President Baroness McGregor-Smith wants business rates relief and the emergency rate of VAT extended beyond the end of March. She's also calling for a focused furlough support scheme. International news, and 2 staff from the charity Save the Children are among at least 35 people who were killed in Myanmar on Christmas Eve. Government soldiers rounded up a group of people in a village before fatally shooting them all. The charity says the 2 workers were travelling back to a nearby office when they got caught up in the attack. They've called now on the UN Security Council to respond. And in the United States, the judge in the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell is urging the jury to work slightly longer hours as COVID cases rise in New York. She says an astronomical spike caused by Omicron means there's an increasing risk now that jurors and participants may need to quarantine. Ghislaine Maxwell is on trial in the States, accused of luring young girls to be abused by Jeffrey Epstein. She denies all the charges. That's your news update. I'm back in an hour. Now back to Andrew.
Thanks, Polly. I am joined now by my superstar panel. We have author and journalist Hilary Freeman, editor at the Jewish Chronicle Jake Wallace-Simons, and political consultant Emma Burnell. Welcome, everyone.
Hiya.
How are you all doing? Has it been a good Christmas? Must have been for you, Jake, because you've been promoted. You're now editor at the Jewish Chronicle. I just learned.
Yeah, very happy non-Christmas, I guess.
Fair enough. It's a good Christmas. What about you guys? Have you had a good Christmas?
A lovely Christmas.
Yeah?
We were supposed to go to France, though.
Of course. And you weren't able to do
We
that.
weren't able to. So we still haven't. And my daughter hasn't seen her grandma for 2.5 years now.
Yes, I know. There's a lot of people in that position. But, you know, a nice Christmas at home, doing very little, that's kind of the ideal, isn't it, in many ways? Emma, what about yourself?
Very quiet, because my sister and her husband, who's a chef who was supposed to cook for us, were stuck isolating in Dubai. But my mum did an amazing job pulling it all together at the last minute.
That's very
so
nice.
I spent it with mum and dad, which was lovely.
Very nice indeed. Well, let's crack on with some of these stories. I'll be very interested to hear what you've got to say about them, because there's more than I expected tonight. I thought it'd be a slow news day, but there's a few interesting stories tonight. So in the US, health officials have halved the recommended isolation time for people with asymptomatic COVID-19 from 10 days to 5 days. And this measure is expected to alleviate disruption caused by staff shortages because of infections. The Centers for Disease Control says most transmissions happen in the 2 days before and 3 days after symptoms develop. So joining me now is a clinical academic, Dr. David Strain. Thank you for joining me, Dr. David Strain.
Hi, Andrew.
So what do you make of this decision by health officials? Do you think this is the right approach to take, and should we be replicating it over here?
Well, this is actually mirrored by what we're doing in the UK at the moment, that we've dropped it down to 7 days. And the difference between the 7-day approach that we're using in the UK and the 5 days in the US is actually based on the fact that we are better at identifying COVID earlier. And therefore, we do need the extra 2 days, because we'll find the couple of days that we will identify it before the US do. But as the CDC says, the most infectious period is in the first 48 hours after you develop COVID. So the vast majority of people, the infectivity rates start to fall after that 48-hour period. And then providing we test negative from the lateral flow test, which again is a really good way of finding out what your viral load is in your throat and in your nose, then it's a good time to be re-engaging with the population. However, the caveat is that everybody who's tested positive at some point should go back on to wearing their mask and make sure that they are actually only engaging with people as they need to, rather than as they would like to. And I think that's the important gap here. If you're wearing your mask and you're out and about, that's one thing, but it's not still particularly safe to be getting into the nightclubs, to be getting into the bars, and to be mixing until we've reached the 10-day period.
So are you suggesting that you're broadly in favour of the reduction of the isolation period, and that, you know, in the past when we've been told that it's 10 days since we've had the symptoms that we need to isolate, that has been maybe a little bit over-cautious, is that right?
So these are all changing data. With the Omicron variant, we've seen that the number of virus that you create rises very, very rapidly. It's a 70-fold increase in the amount of virus that you produce. But with this very rapid rise, there is also a more rapid decline. So the infectious period with the Omicron variant is actually shorter than it was with the Delta. So you are far more infectious for a short time, but actually the infectivity starts to decline. And in the UK, we've already seen a move that we've dropped from 10 days down to 7 days. And again, this is all based on the newer data from the newer variant rather than we got it wrong, because with the original variant and the Alpha variant, we were still seeing people very infectious for a 10 or 12-day period. With the Delta variant, that dropped down to the 7 to 10 days. Now we're seeing it in the 5 to 7 days is your infectious time.
So given the new data that's come in about the Omicron variant, and it seems to be wonderful news insofar as, yes, as you point out, it's far more transmissible. We're all probably going to get it at some point. But nevertheless, when we do get it, the symptoms are relatively mild and it's nowhere near as severe as Delta or previous incarnations of the virus. So do you think there is a case at all for revisiting the concept of herd immunity, or the idea that perhaps we should open up society, let the virus run its course, and in a sense, we all have the advantage of a kind of free vaccination?
So when it comes to the Omicron variant, if you are already double vaccinated and boosted, you're absolutely right. The hospitalizations are much lower. The case fatality rate is much lower. But it's important to say that we're in a different scenario than we were 12 months ago. And for people who are still unvaccinated, this is still a horrendous disease. And I'm seeing people on a daily basis who are unvaccinated, who are presented with both Delta and Omicron variant, and who are still very rapidly ending up in ITU. And remember, we still have about 15% of our population that still haven't had their vaccine. The other important caveat is if you get COVID plus any other disease, it makes whatever the other disease is much worse. So if you're going for an operation, your mortality and your complication rate is about twice as high. If you have a heart attack, your risk of getting heart failure is about twice as high. And that's the real risk of COVID as it stands at the moment, not of dying of COVID itself, but of the fact that if you've got COVID and any other disease, it is going to get worse. And as long as we can continue getting the vaccine out there, then there will come a time, and hopefully the next iteration of COVID will be one that is a lot less severe. So we're hoping that Pi, Rho, Sigma, Tau will become successively less severe diseases. And then eventually we will end up in a position that COVID becomes nothing more than the next series of common colds, and we can just get on with our life as normal. I don't think we're there yet, but that is definitely the way that we're heading.
Well, thanks for that. That's very clearly expressed. And from what I understand it, as we move through the Greek alphabet, it runs like any other virus and becomes weaker and weaker as it goes along, which is fantastic news. But given what you've just outlined in terms of the risks that are involved, firstly, if you're not vaccinated, but also if you have other conditions, is there an argument that we should do our best to inform people of those risks, but then give them the onus of choice? In other words, once everybody in the country knows about this, we can open up society. If you've chosen not to get vaccinated, you've taken that risk, you've taken that choice, and the repercussions will fall on you. Is there a case there?
There is very definitely. We are heading in that direction, and we're going to see that on New Year's Eve, that people who choose to go to parties without a vaccination on the basis of a negative lateral flow test. I mean, if you're doing that in London, every 1 in 20 people is infected. So if you're doing that in London and you're unvaccinated, chances are you are going to come home with COVID and you are going to end up really, really sick. However, the important caveat is there are still the vulnerable, the immunocompromised, the elderly living within our community that even though they've been vaccinated, the vaccine doesn't work quite as well. And that's where the real ethical debate lies, because if we do fully open up society, we are putting an entire group of our vulnerable elderly patients back into a place where the only safe place for them is in isolation. And remember, the entire society is judged on how we treat our elderly, how we treat our vulnerable. And therefore, I don't think we're at a position yet where we can say, you take your choice and you do this, because this is not just you that's taking the risk. It's this very vulnerable elderly cohort that we need to be concerned about.
And finally, do you foresee a time when isolation will be scrapped altogether and we won't go back to this? Do you think that's ever going to be possible? I think a lot of people have this fear, what with talk of further booster jabs and further lockdowns, that this is going to be a kind of never-ending cycle. And I think people are really afraid of that and the implications for civil liberties. Do you share those concerns or have any sympathy with them?
I have a lot of sympathy with them. I, like many other people, I want to get back to life as normal. I want to have friends over. I want to go out to the pub again. But I don't think we are quite there yet. There is a lot of work at the moment looking at an Omicron-specific vaccine. One of the problems is the vaccine to the original variant is only giving us 2 to 3 months worth of protection against Omicron. So we're going to end up in this cycle of every 2 to 3 months that we'll end up needing a booster in order to reduce the transmission. When we start getting Omicron-specific variants, or ideally, when the virus starts to mutate into a less severe illness that doesn't have these carryover effects, it doesn't cause long COVID, it doesn't cause a higher risk when you're operated on or when you have another disease, that's the point that we can really let our guard go. That's the point we can get out, we can start having parties again, and we can start enjoying society at its fullest. But at the moment, when it comes to, particularly for healthcare workers, it becomes impossible for a healthcare worker to enjoy their New Year's party, knowing that we are going to go back into work tomorrow and potentially infect our patients who are already at high risk for other people. And this is the position that we're in at the moment. I, like everyone else, really want to get back to normality. I want to go to the bar. I want to get out and party again. But we're not quite there yet.
Dr. David Strain, thanks very much for joining me. I'm going to come to my panel now because I think there's a lot of interesting points that were raised there and mostly pretty optimistic, actually, the message of that. But I do wonder about this. Is there a question here of liberty? Are we forgetting about liberty at all? And are we becoming overly precautionary as a society? Hilary, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that is an issue, definitely, because yes, I agree. We do have to think about old and vulnerable people, and we can't say to them, well, it's up to you if you want to just isolate yourselves for the rest of your lives because you don't want to take the risk. That isn't fair. But at the same time, it's not fair to stop children going to school. It's not fair to stop young people going out and enjoying their experience. I know people who've been at university for 2 years and have not really had a university experience. So yes, that's not fair either. So I think we do have to, at some point, decide that this is just going to be another cold virus. And yes, some people are going to get badly affected, but we can't change society for those people.
Well, I think Theresa May has been saying this quite a lot at the moment, hasn't she? That this is not the way you deal with the virus. We have to learn to live with this thing, and we have to find a way through it. Do you think, Jake, can I ask you about this? Do you think that there is an element of a lack of trust going on here? I mean, the doctor was talking about the ways in which people can put others at risk, particularly if they're not vaccinated or if they go and visit old relatives. But shouldn't we be trusting people more? Because, the information's out there. We've all heard all the information. We know what we're doing, don't we?
Yeah, one of the things I've been uncomfortable with from the beginning, to be honest, is this slight authoritarian tinge towards the government's behaviour with regard to the population that's focused on rules and even criminalisation of people's everyday activities, like going to the park. I remember during the first lockdown, even going to the park was a criminal offence. People were sitting on a bench and feeling like they were going to be arrested by police, and some people were.
Some people were, yeah.
So and we're no longer, thank God, in that position. But I still feel that now the sort of government legislation has very clear limits. So, for example, we've got many different groups of people in society. Some people have been vaccinated once or twice. Some people have been boosted. Some people haven't been vaccinated at all. Some people are older or immunosuppressed or whatever. And so the difference in risk varies widely between different people. I think that if you then look for one solution to fit on top of everybody, so whether it's 10 days isolation or 5 days or whatever it is, it's never really going to work. I think what the government is missing is trusting people to understand what their own risk is, given their vaccination history and their health and so forth, their obesity levels and all the rest of it, and making decisions accordingly. And that applies for isolation as well. So Dr. Strain hinted at this in his segment just now. Whether it's 10 days isolation or 5 days, for me, really isn't the point. The point is whether you've still got the virus and are going to pass it on or not, and a test will tell you that. And a lot of people already are taking the law into their own hands and saying, OK, I've got COVID, I test every day, and when it's clear, I'm going to go out. People are just doing that. I know a lot of people who are doing that because it's the common sense approach, and yet the government still is clinging to this legislation approach, which doesn't really dignify people's individual common sense and freedom over their own lives.
I'm going to bring Emma in here. Do you think that Jake's got a point there, that we have to trust people more?
I think it's about finding a balance. And to be honest, all legislation is about that, really. If we lived in a completely libertarian society where there were no rules at all, we know that enough people would behave stupidly that it wouldn't work for the rest of us. So it's always, all legislation is about finding that balance between liberty and communality. So I think that on the whole, the government's got it right eventually. But quite often what they've had to do is go harder than they needed to because they went later than they should have done. And so a lot of us have found that a very frustrating process where we've ended up in a much firmer lockdown that might have been needed because it came too late.
Wasn't that part of the policy, though, of actually trying to instil fear in the population in order to make sure that they could be controlled in the way that that the government wanted them to be? I mean, they do have a nudge unit. They do have this sense in which, for instance, we had this recent discussion about the predictions by Sage, and they were only asked to give the worst possible case scenario. That's all they were asked for. And I think maybe, isn't there an issue here that a lot of people aren't, in order to enact the kind of legislation you're describing, we have to trust the authorities, And part of the problem, I think, early on is we didn't have clear messaging about all of this. I mean, you mentioned the police arresting people. We had police looking through people's shopping baskets to check what they were buying. That wasn't even a law. We had drones over the Peak District spying on people for walking their dog. Again, people who hadn't broken the law. And all of this made people nervous. Hillary?
And I think it's had a knock-on effect now with the whole kind of conspiracy theory and the anti-vaxxers because, people will say, well, clearly, this is all part of a big conspiracy for, the authorities to take over and for us to lose our freedoms. Just look at what happened at the beginning, And I think if they'd taken a more gentle approach, it would be a lot harder for those conspiracy theories to be sort of infiltrating society as much as they are doing.
I mean, do you think this is right? I mean, because if you think about, for instance, in Wales recently, where you had the politician talking about how Omicron is just the same as all the other variants, and we all know it's not. And when you hear, and they removed the recovery element of the NHS pass, which of course gives you better immunity than the vaccine, and that makes people, it lends them towards conspiracy theories, doesn't it? It gives them credence when they don't deserve credence. Jake,
there's a related point to this as well, which is that when the government does scare people in this way, as you've described, people respond, and they respond by not going out, by working from home, by not visiting the pubs and so on. To the extent that we've seen that when lockdowns have come into force, people have already been locking themselves down, and so the lockdowns are almost unnecessary because people are already behaving in that way of their own volition. And that kind of underscores my point, really, which is that all you need to do is give people the proper information and be honest and transparent with people. There is a deadly risk for some people, or there is a risk for a greater number of people, depending on the variant or on the situation. It could be very, very serious, and people will respond, on the whole, pretty responsibly. If they feel at risk,
But isn't there a possibility, Emma, that, for instance, with these these tactics that the government have initiated, that this will never be the case? People will always be afraid. I mean, I asked the doctor about whether we're going to return, whether we can learn to live with this without lockdowns. He seems optimistic that we will, but I think there's such a fear around this. I'm not sure I'm sure there are going to be some people who will always want to be concealed away, and never take the risk to go out again, which is a tragedy.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think there is a real problem with this unofficial lockdown that we end up in quite often. For someone like me who is part of the theatre world, I mean, a very, very small part, I accept, what you've got is the worst of both worlds, where the government isn't supporting industries because they haven't shut them down, but the shutdown is happening anyway because, A, too many people within theatre are coming down with COVID, but also audiences are, as Jake says, making that personal choice to stay away. People are staying away from the pubs, people are staying away from parties, but we're not being told to. So we're just in this weird limbo where we're not living the lives we want to live, but we're also not really getting the support that we need to not live those lives, if you see what I mean.
Absolutely. I mean, the theatre industry has been utterly decimated by this for obvious reasons. Well, I mean, I'm sure we could talk about that for a lot longer, but we've got more stories to get through. Let's go to a break, though, because coming up, we've got was this the year that Stonewall lost its halo? And those are the words of journalist Joe Bartosh, who's recently written a very interesting article about Stonewall for Spiked magazine. But first, the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Looking ahead now to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking cloudy and wet for many, though across Scotland frost and patches of fog. So tonight's rain then continuing across the southwest to start tomorrow with some heavy bursts at times. A windy morning with coastal gales, though remaining mild with temperatures at around 11 Celsius. The rain in the southwest pushing up across the southeast through tomorrow morning. Strong winds, particularly along English Channel coastlines where gales are possible. And a wet start tomorrow across Wales with widespread cloud and rain, some of which may be heavy at times and windy, particularly along coastlines. A dry start for some in the northwest of England, though becoming increasingly wet and windy through the morning, with rain moving in from the southwest, which will be heavy at times, remaining fairly mild though. Heading to the northeast of England, it's going to be dry there, but a cool start to the day, though rain will build in later and temperatures will rise as mild air pushes in from the southwest. Across Scotland, a cold start to the day with a frost and patches of fog at first. Cloudy, wet and windy conditions moving in across the south, though, through the morning. Wet and cloudy across Northern Ireland tomorrow morning with heavy outbreaks of rain. Windy, but particularly along northern coasts where even gales are possible, becoming increasingly mild, though. And that's how the weather's shaping up during tomorrow morning.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Welcome back. So the year 2021 has been a year to forget for Stonewall, the LGBT charity. Now, for much of the last decade, the charity could do no wrong in the eyes of those who mattered. Stonewall's influence cut straight into the heart of government. The organisation also advised businesses, police, NHS trusts and universities. But during the last 12 months, organisations have sought to distance themselves from the charity over its view on gender identity, with it insisting that people should be able to access, for example, single-sex wards based on what gender they identify as. Even the BBC has opted to cut ties with the charity's workplace equality scheme. Journalist Jo Bartosz has been reflecting on Stonewall's past 12 months in a column on Spiked Online, and she joins me now. Hello, Jo.
Hello. Hiya. Lovely to be here.
Now, you've written this article about Stonewall. It's quite the fall from grace, isn't it? You know, when I used to think or talk to people about Stonewall a few years ago, people had nothing but positive things to say about it. Certainly, when I was at school, it was quite a keystone for gay rights and for advancing the cause for equality. What went wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think for many years they've been trading on their reputation as, you know, an organisation that did good. And to be fair, when they were set up in 1989, they did. They campaigned against Section 28 and made some real gains. But essentially, they were so successful, they're now an organisation in search of a cause, if you like. So they, in 2013, when same-sex marriage was granted, they did themselves out of a purpose. So they sort of started looking around under Ruth Hunt. They accepted a large donation to incorporate trans-specific work and have done so ever since. And as part of that, I mean, this year it's been quite extraordinary. We've seen the current CEO, Nancy Kelly, refer to lesbians as sexual racists if they won't consider relationships with trans women, many of whom, you know, do nothing to so-called transition. We've seen her describe people like me with gender-critical beliefs. That is to say, I believe, as I think do most people, that sex cannot be changed and that sex matters. Your biological sex cannot be changed. She describes that as akin to anti-Semitism. So we've got it's unsurprising, really, that that for many years Stonewall tried to not debate these issues, to say there was no contradiction between the LGB and the T, but there is. Because if you say that trans women are women and trans men are men, then you have to open the door to the idea of lesbians with penises, which is clearly bloody ridiculous. But that is why they've tried so hard to suppress the debate, and why, now that this is all coming out, the wheels are really coming off.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because Stonewall, as you were just saying, I mean, they were involved in some of the great steps forward, the equalisation of age of consent and the Section 28 being repealed and this kind of thing. And as you said, of course, equal marriage and all of these things are quite important. But so many gay people and lesbians are suggesting now that Stonewall doesn't represent them at all. Is this, does there need to be a conflict between the LGB and the T? Is there a way that that could be reconciled, in your view?
To be honest, I don't think so. I mean, we've seen one of the good things about this is there's been a real flowering of new groups for people who are same-sex attracted, who feel they have very different needs from those who identify as transgender. So we've seen, for example, the Lesbian Rights Alliance. They've been going for a very long time. Lesbian Fight Back. There's a new gay men's group, and of course there's the LGB Alliance, who were set up a few years ago. So we've seen a real sort of flowering of lesbian, gay and bisexual culture, which is great and sort of genuinely grassroots. And there's a certain irony at the time that Stonewall have sort of, you see rainbows everywhere, you see big corporations pretending that there's still a lot of work to be done, whereas, to be honest, there isn't that much anymore. Legally, we've won the battles. So it's kind of interesting that now, when there's very little controversy, you get organisations jumping all over and covering themselves in pride flags.
Easy, isn't it? I mean, it would have been quite interesting had corporations been flying that flag before the age of consent was equalised, or before Section 28 was repealed. That would have been impressive. But, now that it's an establishment position, it doesn't strike me as particularly impressive. But this is a very interesting point that you raise. You raise these groups that are there to advocate for people who are same-sex attracted. And I know, of course, that Stonewall on their website and their resources has redefined homosexuality to mean same-gender attracted. But, of course, fundamentally, one of the aspects of gay rights and the fight and the struggle for gay equality has been a recognition that it is to do with biological sex. And that's been quite fundamental. So you can see how and why people are turning against them. But why is it that whenever people raise this with Stonewall, I mean, I've invited them on my programme a number of times, they just, they stonewall me, they absolutely say no. But why is it that whenever someone raises these legitimate concerns, they always claim it's transphobia, it's hate, it's all of these things? I've spoken to many gender-critical feminists. I've yet to speak to one who hates trans people, and yet that is the go-to accusation. Why is that?
Oh, it's a very effective way to silence people. And of course, they've wanted to silence people because their position does not hold. I mean, it is just logically inconsistent. You cannot be born into the wrong body. You can suffer from gender dysphoria, and you can feel compassion for those who do. But that doesn't mean you can literally change sex. So I think any sort of interrogation of that huge leap of logic has to be shut down quickly, because obviously that's what their funding depends on. And it's interesting, they've now developed a whole glossary of additional terms like abrosexual, allosexual, grey sexual, demisexual, to try and sort of expand the remit of what they do. Essentially, they're nonsense terms that they're just sort of trying to sort of expand their market, if you like, because they've realised there's not a lot more that can be done for LGBT people. Ironically, last week, Nancy Kelly was on with Christine Burns talking about transgender politics and sort of supposedly transphobia in the British media. So I'm not surprised she wouldn't appear with you. And she was complaining about the BBC, who obviously ditched their ties to Stonewall. And something I thought was quite amusing about that was she chose to appear on Al Jazeera. Now, I think entirely fair enough for her to choose to express her views on whatever outlet she wishes to do so. But it does seem kind of ironic that the head of a lesbian, gay, bisexual and apparently transgender rights organisation would appear on Al Jazeera, which is obviously part funded by the Qatari government, where, they don't have that many pride marches, funnily enough, whilst complaining about the bigotry of the BBC. Absolutely bonkers. So it's not surprising that they've wanted to suppress criticism and suppress investigation and to sort of smear any opponents as bigoted. And I think the result of that is that when she does go on television, she can't make her case.
How effective do you think these smear campaigns have been? I mean, I've seen very sort of prominent commentators as well, just casually referring to the LGBT Alliance as a hate group. There's no evidence whatsoever for that, but they just repeat it to the extent that I suppose they just assume if they repeat it often enough, it will stick. Do you think, however, that the public mood is turning against this and that people are waking up to what the problem is? I mean, maybe is it the case that the reason why Stonewall was able to infiltrate so many institutions and have so much clout within those institutions is that people didn't really know what it was they were pushing for?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they've traded on their past reputation, and I think organisations know they're supposed to make the right noises about equality, and they're quite happy to just outsource the thinking and make it an HR thing and not really consider it in any depth. And, for a long time, Stonewall were the experts and were supposedly the voice of the community. They haven't been for a very long time now, but obviously it's taking a while for that to filter through to public awareness.
Jo Bartosz, thank you so much for coming to join me today to talk about this very, very important issue. Thank you very much. Coming up, we'll have a first look at the morning's front pages and in the media buzz, how social media influencers have combined with physics. All that coming up.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. My superstar panel have returned. I have author and journalist Hilary Freeman, editor at the Jewish Chronicle Jake Wallace-Simons, and political consultant and playwright Emma Burnell. Welcome back. I wanted to ask you about that last interview that I had with Jo Bartosz, which is talking about Stonewall. And I sort of first, because I was a big supporter of Stonewall, and then I noticed that they were sort of veering off into this a sort of trans-obsessed policy. To the expense of gay rights, and I have been worried about this. Do you think I'm wrong about this? Have I got this wrong, Hilary?
No, I don't think you're wrong. I mean, I think a few years ago, Stonewall would have been an organisation that I would have thought would have treated all people who were LGBT.
Well, it's getting more complicated.
It is, yeah. I know. There's about 600 extra pluses after that now. Equally, and now I feel that it is really just acting for the T version of that.
Yes.
Those minorities, and that a lot of people feel that it doesn't represent them anymore.
No, but I think a lot of trans people don't think it represents them because they're taking a very specific view on gender identity ideology, which is this idea that we all have a kind of sexed soul, a kind of, which is Helen Joyce's phrase from her recent book on the subject. But a lot of trans people don't think that.
No, and to say that if a lesbian doesn't want to sleep with somebody that has a penis, that's akin to anti-Semitism. I mean, I'm Jewish. I find that incredibly offensive as a Jew.
Yeah.
And
it's offensive to lesbians. Right?
Yes, and it's offensive to women.
Of course, absolutely.
And to lesbians. So.
Jake, what do you make of this? Do you think that's right?
I think I agree with you. I mean, I think that the thing that really terrifies me about it is that one particular point of view, which is very, very fringe in terms of the overall country, is being promoted as an orthodoxy from which you can't dissent.
Yes.
And to be honest, any view that anybody has if that's promoted as the thing that you have to think, there's something sinister about it, let alone if it's so fringe and so minority. And that's what's really terrifying. It's a sort of fascism, that's the sort of fascist way of thinking that lies behind it. You've got to agree with us or else we'll hound you out and we'll destroy your life.
I mean, you know, I understand the point that there is still discrimination and prejudice towards people of minority groups, and that goes for trans people as well. There are always going to be people out there who have these horrible, reactionary, unreconstructed views, and standing up against them is important. And one would have thought that's what Stonewall is there to do. But when they start attacking gay people and sort of, exactly as you say, saying that lesbians who refuse to sleep with individuals with penises are therefore the equivalent of anti-Semites or fascists or whatever, that to me is counterproductive. They're not serving their remit, are they, Emma? What do you think?
No, and I think it's really painful for a lot of people who've been involved in the struggle. I mean, I'm a straight woman, but I was saying in the break, I spent a lot of my late teenage years marching alongside my gay brothers and sisters against the vile Clause 28.
Yeah.
So the fact that I'm now being divided from some of that community because I have a belief that sex is real, and a second wave feminist attitude towards gender as a social construct that we can all identify in and out of and do regularly. I mean, the amount of times I'm walking down the street wearing DMs and red lipstick, what gender is that conforming to? I don't conform to anything. I'd like not to conform. But what worries me is that Stonewall should be the space, the safe space where gay people, trans people, feminists of whatever sexuality, of whatever identity, can come together and find where they can work together and find the really difficult, thorny answers to these questions, rather than simply saying, no debate, this is how it goes.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? Why can't we have the discussion? You know, I'm always struggling on my show is to get people on from different sides, but one side won't come on if the other side is there, and it gets very, very ugly. And, of course, what you want to have is a sensible discussion. It's interesting what you mentioned, Jake, about this idea that there's this kind of sense in which you're not allowed to dissent from this view. Helen Joyce, when she was when she wrote her book Trans, it's this book called Trans, which came out relatively recently, and she wasn't writing about these issues a few years ago. But she said to me in an interview that the reason she started is she was commissioned to write an article about the issue for The Economist. But when she started emailing other people about it and talking to people, they were saying, "Oh no, you can't ask her about this," or you know, "I know you mean well, but you're coming across as a Nazi," and things like that. And she was so shocked that, of course, the natural journalistic impulse is to probe deeper, and she ended up writing a book. So, I mean, is there any other issue, Jay? I mean, as a journalist, is there any other issue that you can think of where journalists are just told to shut up, don't ask those questions, just leave it alone? Or is it just this?
I think this is perhaps the most potent example of a trend that's emerging that has been described pejoratively as woke.
Yeah.
You know, that there are certain ideas about identity, usually, identity and race, that you just cannot question.
Yeah.
But I think this is a very sort of potent example of it, because the point really isn't that I want them to agree with me. I respect their view that sex can be changed and so on and so forth, and how you identify is the sex that you are. I respect that. They have the right to think it, and I respect that. All I want is for them to respect other people's right to disagree with them. That's it, as simple as that.
Sure.
Nobody's trying to close them down, but we just want them to allow us to think as well.
Well, sure. I mean, isn't the liberal approach to this fairly straightforward, which is you should be able to call yourself whatever you like, do whatever you like to your body, identify as you like, but you can't then force other people to use words they don't want to use, or you can't force someone who knows that we are a sexually dimorphic species to lie about it and say, no, we're not. I mean, that's a simple thing.
And not to be able to question anything. I don't. This is, I was brought up. You question everything. And to see this in universities as well. That's particularly scary.
Yes.
That these ideas are being, are stopping people from expressing their views when they're at universities.
Yeah.
That's what university is about, isn't it?
Well, we saw what happened recently with Kathleen Stock, of course.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, and that was a particularly egregious example of this. Go on.
I mean, I do think it is important that we behave in the right way to each other whilst having this debate.
Yep.
So there is no need to be rude to people either way. So you sometimes get trans people or their allies using slurs that are particularly ageist and misogynist.
Yes.
Yeah.
On the other side, you also get people deliberately misgendering and just going, oh, it's just a bloke in a dress.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? If you genuinely believe that presentation is not important to your sex,
yes,
then you shouldn't behave in that way either way.
Right.
And I just think there's an etiquette to talking to people and to changing minds that is not about being rude. So if we are going to change this debate, all of us, and that definitely includes me, have to behave better when we're taking part in it.
Do you find, though, that when people are insulted online, they tend to react in the same way, and so things get worse and worse and worse? I mean, I saw a thread...
Social media.
It's social media that does it. I saw this thread the other day on Twitter, and I couldn't believe it was a group of trans activists dogpiling someone, and the outright homophobia, there were anti-gay slurs that I haven't seen since the 80s. I mean, I'm not kidding. People hoping that they die of HIV and all sorts of incredible old-school anti-gay tropes. And we're talking hundreds and hundreds. And I'm thinking something is being rehabilitated here. Something is not right. And I think it's what you say. We need to restore the idea of civility, ultimately, in discourse. Jake, sorry.
Well, I mean, I agree with you to some extent, but I think that it's important to acknowledge that it's OK to be rude as well.
Right.
But it's what do you mean by being rude? I mean, it's OK to have a robust debate and to be insulting and to be open with how you feel and to be... No one's trying to make everybody nice. I mean, that would be boring too. But what we're talking about is when it gets really abusive and nasty and vindictive...
Or threats of self-harm, threats of suicide.
And where it becomes, death threats and the rest of it. I mean, that clearly is over the line. But I think it's important to recognise that we have a right to be rude to each other as well. I mean, life would be so boring if we didn't.
Shut up.
We have a right to...
Actually, that's a good point to end. Let's shut down your freedom of speech, Jake. Right, so we're going to have to... So now we're going to have a look at our media buzz, tomorrow's news tonight. So let's kick off with the very first look at the front pages, hot off the press. We've got the I newspaper, which leads with hospital cases climbing, but serious illness from Omicron remains lower. Omicron or Omicron? I never get that right. It says the number of COVID patients in hospitals has risen 38% in a week to 9,500. But the good news is there's no increase in the use of ventilators. And on the front page of The Telegraph, we've got Test and Trace is not having its finest hour. They have been telling people to isolate incorrectly. Messages are still asking people to isolate for 10 days when new guidance has been cut to 7 days. Have they ever had a finest hour? I don't think that app ever particularly worked. Anyway, on to our first media buzz story then. Half of Britons don't know what levelling up is, while 1 in 4 haven't heard of the policy at all. That's despite politicians continually using the phrase.
Levelling Up Fund. A speech on levelling up. Major priority. If levelling up doesn't mean... To level up the country.
They really like the phrase, don't they? It's quite... but I'm not sure. I didn't know what it was until relatively recently. Is it an Americanism? Where's it come from? Emma, do you know about it? I mean, you would know about this being a political consultant.
Well, I am slightly obsessed with localism. I used to work for a local government think tank, and I've done some work with the local trust, who I think are fantastic. Levelling up is really... it's an amorphous phrase, and lots of people are arguing over what it means. And the government don't really know what it means because they've delayed the release of the white paper on levelling up 2 or 3 times now.
Have they?
And it's now due out in the new year. It was originally due out in October, November, December.
Yes.
So they're clearly having a fight about what it means. There are very clear things that you can do to economically rebalance the country, which is ultimately what people think it means. But the problem you have when nobody really understands what a phrase means is that you can never deliver it.
OK, can you define it for us?
Well, for me, I think levelling up would mean investing in communities at a community level and making sure that that is not something that becomes political football. So you make it long-term, you make it hyper-local, so it's below the kind of level where people are going to fight over it politically. You make it stable so that it has a long-term post-this government, post-election life. And you make it community-led, and you give the communities, you say to them, what do you need here? Because what you need in your very local area, well, even my tiny street, we would do something completely different than 2 streets along, where they do need something different. They have slightly different geography.
The thing about this phrase, though, I mean, it strikes a lot of people, I think, as just sloganeering.
It is.
There has been a YouGov poll which found that 2/3 of people in the north of England think the Tories aren't spending enough money in their region. So I think this is... what about levelling up is about pulling up other regions that are falling behind. That's the general idea. Isn't it the case, Hilary, that the government has to do this, whatever they call it? They're going to have to find a way to communicate this message because, of course, they are so reliant now on the industrial heartlands of the north that they managed to poach from Labour in the last election. This is kind of important that they get this message right, isn't it?
It is, and that's why slogans, I don't understand this obsession with slogans, which are just utterly meaningless. You know, we had strong and stable, didn't we? With, you know, Theresa May just repeating it hundreds of times. I mean, they just become meaningless when they're used again and again and again and again.
Particularly when they're behaving in the exact opposite of what the phrase
exactly.
means. Yeah.
And you know, and with all the cuts that are happening and the price increases with everything, it's actually becoming, it's not just the north that needs help now.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, I live in a borough, I live in Tower Hamlets, which has got I think the highest number of children on free school meals in the country.
Yes.
You know, so it's not just about the north that needs help.
No,
you know?
sure. But why do they keep delaying? I mean, you mentioned, Emma, that they put it back. They kept putting back. We're going to get a white paper early next year. So, I mean,
so they say.
But wasn't this supposed to be their priority, Jake? What do you think? Because you remember when Boris Johnson won his massive landslide victory in 80-seat majority in the House, and he said something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing it, but something along the lines of, I realise you've lent us your support, you've lent us your vote, and we will repay you. So why do they keep putting off the white paper? Why don't they get down to brass tacks on this one?
Well, I mean, I think the answer's quite clear. It's COVID, isn't it? I mean, you know, the pledge to level up and to, as you say, to bring up the standards of living and opportunity and infrastructure and all the rest of it in the north to be more close to that in the south was a key manifesto pledge. But Boris didn't expect to encounter a worldwide pandemic so early on in his prime ministership. And I do feel that, in a way, it's hollowed out the resources that would have otherwise gone towards fleshing out that ambition with actual, you know, hard policy.
Well, Emma's shaking her head, so I'm going to bring her in. Why are you shaking your head there?
It's not COVID. The argument is, as it always is, between the vision of number 10 and the penny pinching of number 11. And the reason that you're having this delay is because the Treasury, and that's partly Rishi Sunak, but it's also just the Treasury and is as it always will be, is desperate not to spend more money than it can possibly
But
help.
a big part
and
of that
in order
it's been spending so much money on things like furlough.
But no, the Treasury mindset was the same before furlough. The Treasury mindset has been the same for 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Well,
and it's basically what you've got is a vision that Boris Johnson can't really deliver but is selling very well, that is not going to get funded either by a Conservative Treasury who are loath to spend money, public money generally, or by one that's coming that has the great excuse of we're coming out of COVID.
Yeah.
So, you know, either way, what's happened is an awful lot of promises that will not be delivered.
Do they really care about the north? I mean, I don't think that the Tories won those seats. I think that Labour lost them.
Yes.
You know, and I don't think that they can deliver.
OK, interesting. Well, let's move on quickly to one final story before the break. The Royal Institute of Physics has recruited TikTok stars in a bid to get young people interested in the subject. Influencers have been posting videos of themselves doing experiments to show the impact that physics can have on our everyday lives. Shawnee Kibbe, who's one of the influencers and has 16 million followers, said she hoped her content would make more young people seize the opportunity physics has to offer. That's an interesting idea, isn't it? That seems like quite a positive thing to me. What do you think, Hilary?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great to get particularly girls interested in physics.
Yeah.
I know at school, I thought I was rubbish at physics. I gave up at 14.
Was that because you felt that you should feel that way, or was it a natural impulse?
I think it was the way it was taught.
OK.
It wasn't taught in an interesting way. And actually, my last book was about quantum physics, was about parallel universes.
So clearly you did have an interest.
I did have an interest,
Yeah.
but it wasn't ignited at school, and I gave up physics at 14.
Well, I mean, it does sound to me like a very good idea. If you're going to get people interested, go through TikTok. It's better than all the normal kind of things you see on TikTok, which are completely frivolous
Exactly.
and just people dancing badly, mostly from the things that I can see. Anyway, after the break, we're going to be looking at more of tomorrow's front pages. But first, here's the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Looking ahead now to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking cloudy and wet for many, though across Scotland frost and patches of fog. So tonight's rain then continuing across the southwest to start tomorrow with some heavy bursts at times. A windy morning with coastal gales, though remaining mild with temperatures at around 11 Celsius. The rain in the southwest pushing up across the southeast through tomorrow morning. Strong winds, particularly along English Channel coastlines where gales are possible. And a wet start tomorrow across Wales with widespread cloud and rain, some of which may be heavy at times and windy, particularly along coastlines. A dry start for some in the northwest of England, though becoming increasingly wet and windy through the morning, with rain moving in from the southwest, which will be heavy at times, remaining fairly mild though. Heading to the northeast of England, it's going to be dry there, but a cool start to the day, though rain will build in later and temperatures will rise as mild air pushes in from the southwest. Across Scotland, a cold start to the day with a frost and patches of fog at first. Cloudy, wet and windy conditions moving in across the south, though, through the morning. Wet and cloudy across Northern Ireland tomorrow morning with heavy outbreaks of rain. Windy, but particularly along northern coasts where even gales are possible, becoming increasingly mild though. And that's how the weather's shaping up during tomorrow morning.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Andrew Doyle. I'm delighted to be joining you for a second consecutive bank holiday evening. Still to come, we've got GB News' very own Darren Grimes, who's going to be joining us to talk energy, who is to blame for the looming crisis, and how damaging will it be to the economy? And are schools going woke? Apparently the school curriculum has changed to focus more on diversity. Also, my superstar panel will return to go through all of today's eye-catching stories and tomorrow's news. They are author and journalist Hilary Freeman, editor at the Jewish Chronicle Jake Wallace-Simons, and political consultant and playwright Emma Burnell. And by the way, always remember that you can get in touch. I want to hear what you've got to say about these stories. So just email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. Or, of course, you can contact us on that hell site that is Twitter at GB News. But first, it's the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Andrew, thank you. Good evening. Coronavirus cases in England have hit a new record high of over 117,000 new infections. More than 9,500 people are also in hospital with the virus. That's the highest total since March. Today, a senior government minister urged people to enjoy themselves during New Year celebrations, but to exercise caution. Parties were given the green light in England yesterday after it was confirmed there'd be no more fresh restrictions before 2022. Labour MP has told GB News the picture's constantly changing because of new data.
Always looking to what will happen in the next week, the next 10 days, what will happen to admissions in hospital. Because, certainly in London, we are in a difficult place because 1 in 20 of us have got the virus, and that has a huge impact on the staff in our hospitals and our care sector. And also, I am sure that we all desperately want the schools to open next week. So it's really important that there's a plan to do that.
Meanwhile, in Scotland, the First Minister's warning COVID cases will continue to increase as the country experienced a record number of infections over the Christmas period. Nicola Sturgeon is urging people to get a booster jab if they haven't already and stick to social distancing measures. For the fourth consecutive day in Scotland, over 8,000 positive cases have been recorded, a peak of over 11,000 infections recorded on Boxing Day. Meanwhile, business leaders want more support for the hospitality sector after the Omicron variant led to a sharp drop-off in trade in the run-up to Christmas. British Chambers of Commerce President Baroness McGregor Smith wants business rates relief and the emergency rate of VAT extended beyond the end of March. She's also calling for a focused furlough support scheme. In international news, 2 staff from the charity Save the Children are among at least 35 people who've died in Myanmar on Christmas Eve. Government soldiers rounded up a group of people in a village before fatally shooting them all. The charity says 2 workers were travelling back to a nearby office when they were caught up in the attack. They've called on the UN Security Council now to respond. And in the United States, the judge in the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell is urging the jury to work longer hours as COVID cases rise in New York. She says an astronomical spike caused by the Omicron variant means there's an increasing risk that jurors and participants may need to quarantine. The British socialite is on trial in the States, accused of luring young girls to be abused by Jeffrey Epstein. She denies all the charges. That's your news update. Now back to Andrew.
It's just after 11 p.m. It's time for this. So at this time every night, we bring you the rest of tomorrow's front pages, hot off the press. So on the front of The Independent, why has the Ashes gone so wrong for England? A deeper look into the team. And higher taxes and bills cause chaos in the cost of living, with families facing a whopping £1,200 hole in household budgets. The Guardian's gone for a cost of living front page. It says next year UK families could face a hit of £1,200 as wages fall and bills rise. A leading think tank says households faced a cost of living catastrophe. The I newspaper leads with hospital cases climbing, but serious illness from Omicron remains lower. It says the number of COVID patients in hospitals has risen 38% in a week to 9,500. But the good news is there's no increase in the use of ventilators. And on the front page of The Telegraph, we've got Test and Trace is not having its finest hour. They've been telling people to isolate incorrectly. Nothing new there. Messages are still asking people to isolate for 10 days when new guidance has been cut to 7 days. We've got the Mirror now offering us some positivity with the headline, New Year, New Hope. There's a growing feeling that Omicron will not swamp the NHS after Professor Sir John Bell said the worst of the pandemic may well be over. Well, fingers crossed for that one. And the Daily Mail has led with the same topic we discussed earlier. It says, cut isolation to 5 days. After last week, the period was slashed from 10 to 7 days after testing negative 2 days in a row. There's also a story there about the Harry Potter reunion, which won't feature J.K. Rowling. And The Times is also leading with the story of cutting isolation. The Prime Minister is being urged to cut the isolation period to relieve stress on the NHS. And there is a fear for thousands of children being stuck in illegal and unregistered schools, according to an Ofsted director. Emergency talks aimed at fixing Britain's mounting energy crisis are set to continue as the government and suppliers grapple with how to tackle soaring gas prices. A meeting held yesterday failed to find a solution to what one industry leader has described as an enormous crisis, with around 24 energy suppliers driven out of the market since August. The failure to secure a way forward will pile pressure onto the government amid fears that another major supplier could topple as wintry weather and limited supplies in the UK and Europe could force gas prices even higher. GB News' very own Darren Grimes joins me now to discuss this. Hi, Darren. How are you doing?
Hi, Andrew. I'm good. There's a real theme in what you're discussing tonight, isn't there? In your last segment, you were talking about levelling up. Yeah. And I'm afraid that actually, I'm wondering if ministers are really finding out how difficult it is to do just that, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, well, this is it, isn't it? They have always pledged that they are going to do their best to help the poorer communities, the ones that lent them their support during the last election. Isn't this going to impact worse on the poorest families, these increased energy costs? I mean, some of the figures that I was reading there they're astronomical.
Yeah, exactly. It's a real political headache for the government. I mean, the soaring cost of energy, according to the Times analysts that they spoke to, they are of the view that actually the rise in the price cap, so that's the level at which, energy bills can rise, that's set by the regulator Ofcom. And then if you take into account wholesale gas prices, which have spiked like you wouldn't believe, more than 50%, households are actually facing ruinous bills of about £2,000. That's double the amount from the last 12 months if you look at average use. And you just think, when all of this comes at a time when, and you've been covering this on GB News all night, when inflation is well above the Bank of England's target, right? When interest rates are going up, causing mortgage repayments to become more expensive, for example. When everything from the price of your food shop to power in your car, that's all going up. And Brits are saying, hang on a minute, I want a little bit of respite here. What does this levelling up thing actually mean? And apparently 70% of Brits polled by the pollster Comres are actually saying that they're concerned now about the financial impact of increased energy costs. And Andrew, I'm afraid to tell you that my real fear is that we are just seeing the very start of the true cost of the government's pet project, the sort of middle-class green extreme project in net zero, in my view, which will immiserate communities like this one up here in County Durham. And that's my fear, that this is just a taste of things to come in pursuit of that radical policy of net zero.
So your view of this is that this is very much to do with environmentalism and that sort of agenda. And it is true, isn't it? There are general fears that whenever those, however you feel about it, whenever those policies are pursued, it always impacts the poorest in society. And what I don't understand about this, isn't there a way that they can do? I mean, they clearly have a lot of money. They have enough money for furlough. Isn't there a way that they can prioritise this so that poorer people don't get, hit with a sledgehammer at this time of year?
I don't know how working class families are going to really take that burden, shoulder that burden. I really, really don't. I think government is actually going to have to intervene. And I say that as an economic liberal, right? It's not the sort of thing I would normally be calling for. But it just strikes me as this government being, frankly, a little bit out of touch. I mean, you've got them pushing, for example, electric cars, right? You're talking 45% more expensive than similar comparable petrol-powered vehicles. And then these heat pump things, remember those? 10 grand to install those, and they might not even warm your house entirely as a traditional gas boiler would at a fraction of the price. And this is what gets me, right? This is what I'm really, really quite troubled by. It's that Boris Johnson isn't going to be around to have to deal with the true political fallout of all of these costs, right? The sort of paternalistic green pet projects. But I do think, and MPs like Steve Baker have been warning this, one of the most prominent Tory rebels, that the Conservative Party are going to end up ultimately paying a price, not just at the pump, but at the ballot box, in the fact that he actually compares it to Margaret Thatcher's poll tax, right, where you had a real political upset there, and she ultimately lost. She was kicked out of number 10 by her own party. And I'm just really worried about the immiseration, ultimately, as you say, of the least well-off in society in order to appease what I call the middle-class green extreme. I'm really worried about that, and frankly, I think it's completely incompatible with any true levelling up agenda. I really, really do.
You talk about the poll tax there, and it strikes me that whenever there are these sort of policy measures that are deeply unpopular with the voting public, there's almost a kind of tone deafness that's going on there. Is it the case that we're just dealing with a political elite that just have no connection whatsoever with ordinary working people? I mean, in the past, parliamentarians used to come from all walks of life, and you would have people who'd been in the mines and they ended up in Parliament. And it seems to me that's not the case now with the way that Parliament works. It's very much a kind of a vocational thing. You go to Oxbridge, you do your PPE degree, and then you're into Parliament. It's a different world now. And is that part of the problem?
I think it is actually, yeah. I think, you know, going from a cushy job in a think tank in Westminster straight into Parliament, for example, which is the route now, you're right. You don't have, it used to be the case that Labour would put forward those that worked in the mines in areas like this, right? It used to be the case that there would be a real representation of the working class in Parliament. And again, I'm starting to sound like a little bit of a sort of left-wing social justice activist, yeah, Andrew, which might surprise you all. But I do feel that, and it's speaking about these things in really quite abstract terms, right, as far as net zero is concerned, and these are the radical policy proposals. And then you've got them talking about things like a meat tax, for example, and I'm just like, what world are you living in? Have you ever struggled to put food on your table? Have you ever been embarrassed enough to have to go to a food bank or something like that to actually feel that these zany ideas that we simply haven't been asked about and there isn't a democratic mandate for, in my view? I'm increasingly of the view and of the real sense of concern that there just simply isn't any democratic oversight of this stuff. We're just pushing it all through. We're just saying, right, everything's going to be hunky-dory, Andrew. It'll be fine. It'll sort itself out. You know, there is some technology coming galloping down the hill like a sort of valiant knight on a white steed. Well, I'm afraid that isn't good enough, right? People need to know how they're going to get through the next few months, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, and I can completely understand that if this was a gradual increase, if it was something relatively small, then they could get away with it. Yeah. This is absolutely astronomical. I mean, to the extent that it will plunge people into poverty. And, you know, I mean, am I getting this? I mean, look, the Tory party at present are not doing particularly well in the polls. They're losing a lot of support over, obviously, you know, the sleaze elements and also, of course, the parties that they had in Downing Street. Could this be this kind of thing? Could this be the nail in the coffin? Could this be the thing that opens the door for Labour to rebuild the Red Wall?
Well, I think if Labour really start to get their head around what it is actually that's happening to the British people at the moment, I'm afraid to say that I'm not that convinced either by the argument that the Labour Party are any more in touch with what's actually going on out there in the country than the Conservative Party are, because ultimately, right, they are all pushing the same agenda. There isn't that much of a difference between the two parties as far as their economic policy is concerned at the moment. And I think the one way in which you can get voters to take notice and start to talk about politics is by hitting them in the pockets. They are about to be hit in the pockets in a way in which they haven't been since the financial crash, right, Andrew? That is pretty extraordinary. That is really going to hurt families, communities, and bank balances. And ultimately, when that happens, voters start to take note. The Labour Party do have a unique opportunity here. I really do think that after a decade of Tory power, right, more than a decade of Tory power, they should be absolutely romping home at a time of economic crisis. It's a damning indictment on them that they're not really cutting through in any real meaningful way. Yes, there's been a bounce in the polls, but nothing major, you know, nothing to suggest that they're going to win an outright majority or anything like that. But if they do start to actually turn around and say, right, here's what we're going to do to help you, here's the Conservative Party simply aren't getting serious enough on this, we need to have a conversation on what it is that we're going to do to actually, as you say, balance the burden on the poorest in society. We need to have that conversation. There needs to be that democratic oversight, but there simply isn't any scrutiny or accountability on this stuff. That's what gets me.
Well, let's see what happens. It's going to be very interesting in any case. So thank you, Darren Grimes, for joining us tonight. Coming up, are schools going woke? Apparently, the school curriculum has been changed to focus more on diversity. But first, the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Looking ahead now to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking cloudy and wet for many, though across Scotland frost and patches of fog. So tonight's rain then continuing across the southwest to start tomorrow with some heavy bursts at times. A windy morning with coastal gales, though remaining mild with temperatures at around 11 Celsius. The rain in the southwest pushing up across the southeast through tomorrow morning. Strong winds, particularly along English Channel coastlines where gales are possible. And a wet start tomorrow across Wales with widespread cloud and rain, some of which may be heavy at times and windy, particularly along coastlines. A dry start for some in the northwest of England, though becoming increasingly wet and windy through the morning, with rain moving in from the southwest, which will be heavy at times, remaining fairly mild though. Heading to the northeast of England, it's going to be dry there, but a cool start to the day, though rain will build in later and temperatures will rise as mild air pushes in from the southwest. Across Scotland, a cold start to the day with a frost and patches of fog at first. Cloudy, wet and windy conditions moving in across the south though through the morning. Wet and cloudy across Northern Ireland tomorrow morning with heavy outbreaks of rain. Windy but particularly along northern coasts where even gales are possible, becoming increasingly mild though. And that's how the weather's shaping up during tomorrow morning.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Welcome back. Now, 8 in 10 secondary schools are making changes to their history lessons to pay attention to diversity, according to a recent study. The main changes relate to Black and Asian British history, women, the disabled, the working classes and LGBTQ+ issues. Mustn't forget the plus. The survey of 300 teachers, which was carried out by academics at Oxford and Reading universities, found 83% had seen changes to the curriculum. So joining me now is the director at Don't Divide Us, Alka Cuthbert, and editor-in-chief of the Good Schools Guide, Lord Ralph Lucas. Can I just come to you, Alka, first regarding this? Sounds like a lot, doesn't it, 83%? But this wasn't a particularly large sample, was it?
No, it wasn't. It was about, I think, just over 300 teachers. If it was the survey that I'm thinking of, I think was commissioned by the Historical Association. It's not a large number of teachers, but I think that's not the most important point here, really. What is far more, I think, an issue of concern is the fact that virtually all the cultural gatekeepers, the educational professional gatekeepers who are responsible for maintaining disciplinary standards of the most reliable, truthful knowledge, have really kind of lost the way, and they've lost the way for a long time. They're failing to uphold those standards, and I think what that means is that it makes schools, it makes teachers very vulnerable and open to the kind of activities of a minority of ideologues who will be making the most of the fact that the education profession has lost a sense of its own intrinsic purpose, and the idea that education and truthful knowledge in history or any of the subjects is a value in its own right.
Isn't part of the problem that so many of these initiatives are sort of couched in very progressive language? They talk of social justice and inclusion and diversity, and that all sounds wonderful. But when you drill down into it, it is very ideologically driven, a lot of this stuff. Lord Ralph Lucas, can I just ask you about that? What do you think about this? Do you think that we need to be a bit careful about the idea of activism creeping into the classroom through teachers?
I think it's terribly important that the government, and through the national curriculum, through the control it has on GCSE curriculums in particular, frames history as a unifying force in this country, that we share a common history, that I be as interested in how Nadim Zahawi got here as he should be in the country that his family has come to. It should be a great unifying story, and if we're not careful, it will get subsumed, taken away by people who have a different idea of where history should be, that it should be a way of their ideas becoming more powerful at the expense of our cohesion, at the expense of us being a happy and united society. So I think it's terribly important that this subject is being raised, see huge immediate changes happening, but it is, if we don't pay attention to it, then we will find that the whole of history has been swept into an ideological furnace, and we will that its role in giving us roots, in giving us a sense of who we are, in giving us a sense of how people behave, how societies work, where we should be heading, all those things which come from a brilliantly taught history should be at the root of what's happening here, and are clearly under attack from people who want something much narrower.
So, Alka, how do you respond to that? Do you think that this is the case, that ideologues aren't particularly interested in what was necessarily true, but more what is expedient to their cause? Do you think that's right?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think the report itself points out that there are three main reasons that respondents have given for wanting to make changes or having started the process of changing their curriculum. And those reasons are social justice and responding to current events. The third reason is the only truly educational reason, but that's the one we never really hear about, and that I suspect is just sort of given a rhetorical mention. and that is to better represent the nature of history. And I think that would be a very fine ambition to do for schools and in the curriculum, but that would involve massive political will as well as the intellectual resources to undertake that work. Instead, what we get is this idea that history has to somehow represent the very kind of boxed off experiences of groups of people, but categorized according to ethnicity. And I very much agree with what was said previously, that what this results in is a kind of a fragmentation, as if each minority had their own independent history. And that flies in the face of developments in history and historiography itself. You know, where insights from what we now call under the term, say, global history, you know, point us to the interconnectedness of people and events. And instead of which here we're saying, you know, let's box people off and treat each group according as if they had their own separate history.
Well, quite, because I mean,
it doesn't really make sense.
British history is not singularly white, straight history, is it? I mean, British history is everyone's history, all of our history. And I think, as Lord Ralph was saying, that this should be a unifying thing. But can I ask you, Lord Ralph, how do we tackle this? With 83% from this survey, as we've acknowledged that it's a relatively small pool, but it's clear that there are significant changes being rushed through without much in the way of consultation, probably well-intentioned. But we've also had things such as the National Education Union, the largest teaching union, saying that we need activism in the classroom. There's an urgent need to decolonise every level, they say, of the school curricula. And when you've got major institutions like that, major bodies like that, pushing an explicitly ideological stance, is it almost too late to stem that momentum?
No, I think history is pretty secure in the way that it is embedded in the curriculum at the moment, particularly because of the control the government has over GCSE syllabus. But it does need to be a constant battle. There needs to be some aspects of history need to change. I mean, there's been far too little attention to the role of women in history down the ages, and people from different ethnic origins who have made their homes here need to understand how that's happened, and they need to understand something of their own history too, and we need to understand theirs. So things need to change, but the impetus should be coming from the government. It's something that Nadim Zahawi is very well placed to do, given his own personal history. It ought to be a celebration of who we are and of an understanding of how the world is working.
I mean,
we have an extraordinary history.
I totally take that point about how women, for instance, you gave the example of women have been overlooked when it comes to the teaching of history in the past. But I think what I worry about is that if you read history solely through the prism of group identity, you actually end up modifying it and changing it. We saw with the 1619 Project in America, which was a very revisionist project, to the extent that even its own fact checkers raised concerns, and that's because that was ideologically driven. So, Alka, can I put that same question to you? Is how can we push back against this, given that it seems to be so embedded in the sort of in unions, in the teaching bodies, in think tanks? What can we actually do to push back?
I think I would disagree slightly. I disagree with the idea that a response should be to make history a vehicle for celebrating what it is to be British, because I think the idea of impartiality is actually really crucial at school level. And in terms of addressing the problem, I think it would be one thing I would love to see is it will require, the will from on top, from government, but it will also require the will and goodwill and efforts of actual experts in the subject, right? Disciplinary experts, to actually make sure that concept of impartiality is better understood and actually, I would say, put in as, for example, as a standard in the teachers' standard, as a teacher's standards that teachers have to fulfill, because it's that notion of impartiality that I think is really the linchpin of something that Britain can genuinely be proud of which is its liberal education system, which hasn't always worked out in practice necessarily, but it has been a kind of a main ideal in the British education system in particular, as opposed to France or the German or American systems. And that is we're in real danger of losing that. We're in real danger of losing that, the idea that impartiality is something really important. It's essential to inculcating dispositions like tolerance and the ability to deal with opposing viewpoints, which if young children aren't accustomed to, then what kinds of citizens are they going to be when they grow up? So it's crucially important. Yes. So I would like to see attention paid to that.
I mean, I totally take that point, and all good historians are impartial in their analysis, aren't they? They seek not to make moral judgments on the past. And Lord Ralph, just final word to you about this. I mean, but it does strike me, and I'm just coming off the back of what Alka said there, that a lot of the ideological approaches to teaching history come from a position of moral judgment, and that the moral judgment is first and foremost what they are trying to convey. What can we do to address that? And it's only surveys like this that are really alerting the general population to the fact that this is even a thing, that this is even happening. So how can we hope to change it?
I think you have to fight back. You have to argue back. I think this is a strong current in many aspects of the world at the moment, that they're subject to moral judgment, and people are not allowed to be human, and history isn't allowed to be a history of human people taking human decisions in the context in which they happen to be. If you don't fight for what you stand for, then you lose it. There is no freedom without struggle.
That's a very interesting point. It does strike me indeed that a lot of the times when we're talking about history, talking about the toppling of statues, changing landmarks, changing the names of streets, it's often the case that we're judging people from the past by our own standards, which is probably not the way to go. Anyway, thank you both for joining me tonight. It's been a fascinating conversation. Thanks a lot. Now, it's tomorrow's news tonight in our media buzz. So, Liz Truss is the favourite candidate to succeed Prime Minister Boris Johnson among grassroots Tory voters. A poll by Conservative Home found that 23% of respondents thought she was the best choice. That's compared to 20% for her nearest rival, Rishi Sunak. And she actually overtook the Chancellor, who came out on top in August with 31% of the votes, while she just took 12. So is she a credible successor? That's quite a momentum she's building there, Liz Truss. Jake, what do you think? Do you think she's going to be the next Prime Minister?
Well, I think the cliche "it's too early to tell" is definitely appropriate.
Yes, I wasn't asking you to be a prophet there.
I mean, let's not forget. This is a big problem for her. The next opportunity to become Prime Minister won't come for another 2 or 3 years, unless Boris crashes and burns spectacularly, and he doesn't seem to.
Oh, really? You don't think his days are numbered? It feels like it to me.
Well, I don't think so. No, not yet. I mean, certainly he's. His days might be numbered in the longer term in terms of him being holed below the waterline when the next election comes along.
Yeah.
But I think the chances of a Tory leadership challenge soon are receding.
What do you think, Emma? There's been a few more letters creeping in, haven't there, saying that they want to kick him out? I mean, do you think this is do you think he's likely to survive the next few months?
Few months, yes, probably. 6 months, maybe. A year doesn't seem likely.
Right.
I think they will put Boris front and centre throughout COVID, and then as soon as they feel that it's a reasonable time to have a leadership contest, he's out.
I mean, any ideas why Liz Truss is building such a momentum? Anyone got any thoughts on that? Jake?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of reasons. I mean, I think she's been building her public profile quite consistently in terms of going places, signing trade deals when she was in that position, getting a selfie, moving on and so forth. So she's been consciously building up her profile, posing, we saw earlier on the screen, in a tank like Maggie Thatcher, trying self-consciously to position herself in that
you see that as a
frame.
punt for leadership,
it's definitely a self-fashioning, isn't it?
Yeah.
Position her in that sort of frame, herself in that sort of frame. And that does naturally lead to accusations of her being a lightweight, superficial politician, but actually she isn't really. I mean, in her history, she's been behind quite a lot of the big ideas that we see now in Tory policy, such as Freeport, such as retention payments for physics and maths teachers, and even the idea of the Red Wall. She was involved with developing that strategy.
Yeah.
So she has got a history there. And also, I mean, the thing that was going against her for a while was the fact that she's a Remainer, and we're now in a Brexiteer Tory party.
Yeah.
But now that she's taken over from Lord Frost as the Brexit minister, she's got an opportunity to really push her, newfound Brexit credentials.
Well, sure, but there's a lot of Remainers within the party would now say that they still respect democracy, they respect the vote, and she would fall into that category. And like you said, I mean, she's experienced. I mean, she's had five different cabinet posts. She's a good strong contender, isn't she?
Yeah, and she's seen to do things and get things done, which is the opposite of Boris, I guess. Which is kind of, I think, probably the main attraction is that she's not Boris and she's nothing like Boris.
You think it might be as simple as that? But then why her over Rishi Sunak? I would have thought he would be quite a popular, even though it's just economically they're sort of
she hasn't had a chance to mess anything up yet, I guess.
Yeah, it could be as simple as that, couldn't it? What do you think?
I think the shine has come off Rishi Sunak a little bit over the last year. I mean, he's been wedded to this big spending policy. He declares that it's against his Tory instincts, but actually what he's doing is the opposite of being conservative.
Yes.
And I think people have become a little bit suspicious of his very, very sort of shiny, very carefully cultivated media image that's been put out there consistently by his team. And the fact that he is so very wealthy and seems so remote from ordinary people, whereas Liz Truss, I think, plays a bit better with the grassroots.
Yeah. Absolutely. But then when she's in power, I'm saying when as if I know, I'm not mothership to man. If she becomes a Tory leader, I mean, it's a different kettle of fish, just speculating about it posing with the tank, but once you're in the role, it's slightly different. I mean, we saw this with Theresa May. I actually thought she would handle this a whole lot better. When she got into the role, she started imitating Margaret Thatcher, lowering her voice in those early debates. I mean, she actually did that. And it soon became apparent that she wasn't equipped for the job, that she wasn't emotionally equipped for it. I ended up feeling quite sorry for her. Do you think that Liz Truss has the necessary leadership qualities, or do you see those signs, Emma?
I think Liz Truss is Boris without the baggage at the moment. She's playing that populist, staunchly now pro-Brexit. I mean, she was a Remainer, and she's got... But now that Brexit has kind of happened,
yes,
she's kind of on that side. She can do the front person bit. And as I say, doesn't have all of the baggage that Boris Johnson brought with him to number 10 and all of the turbulence. So I think that she's perfectly a strong possibility as capable. I think what you have to remember, and one of the reasons why I think it's more likely to be her than Rishi Sunak, is that the people who will choose, if we do have a contest before at the next election, will be the Tory membership.
Yes.
And they, in the way that and this is not an anti-Tory point, no party political membership is representative of the country by its nature.
Sure.
So they will be more right-wing than the country.
Yeah.
And they will be more looking for a Thatcher replacement than the country would be in general.
Yes.
That's not to say it has to be a woman, but she knows. I mean, that photo on the tank was blatant.
Of course.
But Rishi Sunak is in a slightly difficult position because the things that he did that were quite popular in the country, like the furlough, are not Conservative economic ideas.
No.
So he may lose out on the membership with that. If, on the other hand, he gets the opportunity as we come out of COVID to, as he wants to, he's going to raise taxes, but he's also going to look desperately hard at returning to an Osborneite austerity agenda.
Yeah.
That will make him unpopular in the country, and I don't think it will do enough to re-raise his popularity in the Conservative Party.
So he can't win then?
Yeah, I think Rishi Sunak's in a really difficult position.
Well, this is interesting, and as you know, if the Tories end up with a third female Prime Minister, I mean, that's not good. Labour aren't looking good in this.
It really looks bad for Labour.
They must hate this now. Let's have a look at this other story now. So Amazon has updated its Alexa voice assistant after one of the speakers challenged a 10-year-old girl to touch a coin with the prongs of a half-inserted plug. I'm not making this up. So she got the idea after asking her device. She asked Alexa for a challenge, and now this is based on the penny challenge, which went viral on TikTok. And firefighters have warned about this. So this can lead to the loss of fingers, hands, arms. It's huge electric shocks. It's very, very dangerous. It's worth mentioning that Amazon did update Alexa as soon as this happened, so they were on it. And in response to the incident, Amazon said, "Customer trust is at the centre of everything we do, and Alexa is designed to provide accurate, relevant and helpful information to customers. As soon as we became aware of this error, we took swift action to fix it." I'm sorry, I don't trust Alexa devices. I don't like this listening thing in my house. I think the robots are trying to kill us. I just don't want it. So, but I think what happened here is the Alexa just did an internet search, came up with this challenge. Really sinister, though, isn't it?
Well, it's quite sinister, but on the other hand, it's also quite heartwarming because it actually makes me think, no, the robots are not going to take over because they are not remotely sophisticated enough to be able to take over.
No, not at the moment. But, when we go down the artificial intelligence... I watched Terminator 2 again recently, and I know where this stuff leads. So I just think, get your Alexa, kick them out. Get rid of them. You don't want those because they're constantly listening, aren't they? They're listening for the buzzwords. Am I being paranoid, Jake? Probably.
Well, I think we've all said Alexa so many times that we've set off Alexas up and down the country.
Oh, exactly.
Alexa, give Emma all your money.
Outrageous. We shouldn't be having that. Anyway, we're going to be discussing more stories in our media buzz after this short break. And also, the panel are going to be revealing their greatest Britain and Union Jackers. See you in a moment.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
So lots of you have been getting in touch with your opinions on the topics that we've been discussing. So let's have a look at some of these that have been coming in. We've got this one from Alexi. Alexi has got in touch about cutting the isolation period. So Alexi says, even though symptoms usually take 5 to 6 days to appear, it can be as long as 14 days. We've got this one from Jason. Jason is saying, when people get sick enough to stay at home, they do. And that's the normal way. Why are governments getting involved in our private lives now? Got this one from Nikki. Nikki says, how about cutting it to 0 days? After all, it's just a cold. That is the opinion of Nikki. And Vince, I don't agree with cutting the time period. Maybe a self-isolation period is required to, well, stop the virus spreading. OK, so we're getting all sorts of views here. I mean, ultimately, I do come back to this point of personal responsibility a little bit here. I just feel like we're letting it go a tiny bit, this idea that... And I always get slightly nervous when people are looking to the government to make their decisions for them in absolutely every element of life.
But you know what? I think that's... I don't want to bring Brexit into this too much, but I think it's all part of the same phenomenon of we don't trust experts anymore. And because we were told not to trust experts, trust the government, don't trust experts, don't trust scientists, don't trust economists. Now we're in a position where we need to trust scientists, but we're reliant on the government.
But I think this is slightly different because the scientific consensus hasn't always been there. It's because it's a new virus. Scientists are arguing with each other. It's harder for us to trust the experts when the experts can't agree with each other. I think with Brexit it was very different because we had months and months of political debate and everyone was getting involved. And I thought that was a different thing. What do you think, Jake?
I think that obviously Omicron and COVID in general is a very complex and evolving situation that does have a lot of risk for people. But at the same time, I think that because of the history of it, because it's been such a trauma for us as a society and as a world, there's a sense in which we're loading the significance of a death from Omicron above a death from any other cause. I mean, 25,000 people die of flu every year, for example, and no one's suggesting isolation and masks to prevent flu from spreading.
Yes.
Even though you go back to the 2000s and a flu epidemic was straining the NHS then.
But that's what I mean. Like, if you have flu, you take responsibility and you isolate yourself.
Exactly.
Emma, you don't agree?
No, I think it's really easy to say that when you're in the kind of job that has sick pay, sick leave.
Yeah, sure.
If, like me, you're self-employed, I don't work, I don't get paid.
Yeah.
I don't get paid, my mortgage don't get paid.
That's a very, very good point. Now, tomorrow's news tonight now, in our media buzz. So, have you ever made a joke and someone's taken it a bit too seriously? Yeah, it's happened to me quite a bit. Well, it seems that this might have been what happened to the Labour MP, David Lammy. So he's apologised for nominating Jeremy Corbyn to be the leader of his party at a recent Jewish festival. He said he never thought that Corbyn would actually become leader, and that if he knew what he does now, he wouldn't have put him forward. Was it a mistake, or were there positives that came out of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership? I mean, I'm interested in, can you really nominate someone within your party on the understanding that you don't think it's going to happen? Jake, what do you think of this?
Well, that was what Labour did every time. I mean, traditionally, whenever there's a Labour leadership contest, there's always a far-left candidate who's nominated in the beginning of the process,
yes,
and then dumped along the way, and that's just how things...
Well, isn't the point to open up the debate? Wasn't that
exactly, but the difference this time was actually Ed Miliband changing the rules so that you could pay £3 and become a Labour member and then vote Corbyn in. That's what happened to change things.
Sure.
If that wouldn't have happened, then Corbyn never would have got anywhere near.
No, that's not true. I mean, I wish that were true, because if that were true, it would have meant the Labour members themselves hadn't also elected Corbyn, and they did. Corbyn would have won under their old rules too, and that's
right?
that's statistically correct.
I don't think that's right.
If you look at the breakdown of the votes, he won in each of the categories. So he won with the membership as much as he won with the supporters. Now, as a Labour member, I didn't vote for him, and I wouldn't have voted for him. I am on the centre of the Labour Party, i.e. the left of the country, but not on the hard left. It was a contest in which there were no very attractive options for people like me, to be quite honest, and Corbyn was the one that built the momentum behind it.
But should David Lammy really...
But if you look at the way it was broken down... That was the Labour membership who then later went on and have changed their minds, and I'm glad they have.
Well, I think the point with David Lammy's intervention now, his admission, his apology for nominating Corbyn, is he's trying to distance himself from that period from Corbyn.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening across the Labour Party with Keir Starmer trying to put that period to bed, to welcome Jews back into the party, make Jewish supporters feel comfortable again, and to really move on. That's what this is all about.
And it looks as though that's actually working. I mean, from the studies, from the surveys, it looks like very few members of the Jewish community felt that Corbyn was a safe pair of hands. Many, many more think that Keir Starmer is actually doing a good job on it. What do you think, Hilary?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you've exaggerated, it wasn't just that they didn't think Corbyn was a safe pair of hands. A lot of Jews said that if he became Prime Minister, they would leave the country. That's how scared people were.
Right.
They were not, they were really, really scared. And I think a part of the problem is, I think, with Keir Starmer, who a lot of people have come back and do believe that he is a safe pair of hands. I think some people also feel that he didn't do enough when Corbyn was the leader to support the people who were being thrown out or who were being persecuted.
Not just that, but he also, Sir Keir Starmer campaigned to get Corbyn into number 10. Let's not forget that.
Yeah, they think he's a hypocrite.
And so, you can make the pragmatic argument that if he wouldn't have done that then, he wouldn't be leader now, of course.
Yeah.
But it's also difficult for some people in the Jewish community to swallow nonetheless, I think.
Yeah.
But do you think, should David Lammy really be apologising for this? I mean, this was just a decision that he made back in the day. This isn't really relevant now, is it? We're moving on, aren't we? Corbyn's gone. It's a new party.
You can still apologise for things you've done wrong in the past.
Yeah.
Can you? It's never occurred to me.
Well, we did just talk about history, and I think it is worth looking at through the lens. If we're going to talk about thinking about how history affects the current day, which I think is actually really good and important, then it is important that the Labour Party is honest about the journey it has been on, needs to continue on, and needs to go on.
Yeah.
And I, as someone who really wants to see a successful Labour Party that is not riddled with the problems that we've had over the last 5 years, and just the most appalling behaviours that I've seen in meetings, that I've seen from members online, then we need to be honest about where we've been and look at that history. And in many ways, that's what other people are saying about the broader history teaching that you had in the last segment. So I think it's essential that we both say, yes, we've moved on. Yes, we've drawn a line. Yes, we have absolutely vitally inputted the results of the HRC recommendations. We know who we were, we know who we want to be, and we know where we are on that journey.
Yeah, is there a risk, though, of demonising the further left elements of the party as just essentially anti-Semitic? You know, I think there's been a lot of that going on as well. And actually, there is a contingent that just really support old-fashioned socialist policies that they're not going to get from a centrist like Starmer. Is that a worry?
Well, I think there's an argument for maybe there being another party.
Yeah, I think maybe they should split.
Yeah.
Is that maybe the solution here?
Maybe it is. I mean, but, you know, I think that really, for me, Corbyn and his ilk were really like the old socialist workers.
Right.
And they were sort of like the students who hadn't grown up.
Final word quickly from Jake, and then we've got to move on.
Well, it just occurs to me that, I mean, it's an interesting point you raise about demonising the far left. It seems to me that one of the tragedies of modern-day politics is that the idea of where you stand on Israel and Palestine, on the far left, there's no option for debate.
Yeah.
If you're on the hard left, you've got to be pro-Palestine. And unfortunately, that often means, not always, but often means, you hold some anti-Semitic views.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you can't be on the hard left and say, I'm pro-Israel. It's one of the non-negotiable positions that you have to hold.
Well, it's interesting. It's about ideology, isn't it? It's almost like a set of rules that you have to follow.
Exactly
and you
right.
kind of stop thinking for yourself when you're an ideologue. Anyway, it's time of the show where we're going to reveal today's Greatest Britain and Union Jackass. OK, so I'm going to... apparently I get to choose which of the three of you puts forward the most persuasive argument. So really focus on your rhetoric here. I think that would be a really good idea. So, Hilary, we're going to... No, don't forget about it. That's too much pressure. Who's your Greatest Britain first, Hilary?
I couldn't really think, it's quite sad, but this week, maybe I've not been watching as much news as normal or reading as much news as normal, but I couldn't really think of anyone who particularly shone for me. No, it definitely isn't Boris. So I thought maybe that I've read a lot of, this isn't one person, but I've read a lot of scientists this week who have been really quite optimistic about the end of isolation, about COVID coming to an end, about it becoming a cold, and next year is going to be better.
Yeah, not
and
Sage.
Not Sage, no, but some of the other scientists in the papers, and I'm just sort of I suppose they're my champions because they gave me something to look forward to.
Yeah, but that's fantastic. Jake, who's your greatest?
My greatest Britain is absolutely Cherry Garrard, who was a polar explorer in the Antarctic who joined Captain Scott on his expedition in 1910 and was one of the people who went and found his body afterwards.
Yes.
And the reason I chose him is that if you read his book, it's called The Worst Journey in the World, which is not a brilliant title, but it's a brilliant book.
Okay.
It really exemplifies all the qualities that made Britain great, of fortitude and patriotism and self-sacrifice and modesty.
Yes.
At one point, he just has a single sentence saying, "Today, all my teeth splintered from the cold," and then moves on, and that's it.
Just stoicism.
So not whining, slip up a little bit in the best possible sense. And I feel that I fear that these days there's a tendency to go for the opposite sort of qualities of being more egocentric and less communally aware and so on and so forth.
Yes, absolutely.
And so that's why he's my favourite Briton.
Fantastic. And
Emma, from this week's news, I feel
no, you can choose anything from throughout history.
Emma.
So I've chosen J.K. Rowling because she's under attack again this week. And we've already discussed the trans issue, but J.K. Rowling, what I don't want is, whether you agree or disagree with her on that, for that to be what you think of that person as. And the reason for that, for me, and it's a very personal reason, my darling brother, who I love to bits and pieces, and he lives on the other side of the world from me, he sent me a poem the other day, and he said, in sending it to me, he said, "I read this, Emma, and I thought of you." My brother couldn't read until he was in his 20s. And then he was on his own in a hostel and he picked up the first Harry Potter. And he enjoyed it so much, he taught himself to read there.
I mean, absolutely. J.K. Rowling got a whole generation into
Exactly.
reading. We are almost out of time, unfortunately, so I'm going to just have to ask you who your Union Jackass is with no commentary, please. Who's yours?
The murderous gangster squirrel in Wales.
Oh, blimey. We can't even explain it. We don't have time. Take our word for it. There's a psycho squirrel in Wales, so watch out over there. Yes?
Dennis the Menace, because on his watch, the Beano has gone woke.
Oh, Dennis the Menace, absolutely. I said, terrible. And finally, Emma.
Piers Corbyn, who is a fart in the trousers.
OK, that's all we've got time for, I'm afraid. So thank you to my panel. And tomorrow, Nana Akquia will be here between 10 p.m. and midnight. So see you again soon.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Looking ahead now to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking cloudy and wet for many, though across Scotland frost and patches of fog. So tonight's rain then continuing across the southwest to start tomorrow with some heavy bursts at times. A windy morning with coastal gales.